Good morning. I don't have anyone on. Okay, today we're going to start on Ayin Aleph Amud Beis. That's 71b. We're going to start from Kaitzer L'Shachas Meichel L'Behema. It's 6 lines down from the top. So, right, very good. Okay, now Moshe's on. Moshe made it. Okay, we thank Hashem that they're
Good morning.
Good morning, Moshe. Still able to make it. I know for me it's an extra 2 hours. So
It's just going to be really hard to break. 8 years of 5:30? I woke up at 5:30 anyway without my alarm. So
Me too. I hit the snooze button a dozen times.
I woke up at 5:45, and I told my wife, I said, I don't know how I was waking up at 4 o'clock. I'm tired even now.
yeah.
Okay.
So we can't be late till 3.
Okay. So we're starting Kaitzer L'Shachas. It says, Kaitzer L'Shachas, Meichel Behema. One of the things we learned in the Mishnah is that you're not allowed to harvest before the Eimer. However, certain type of harvests were acceptable. So, for example, if you cut the grain early, what happens is the grain grows, and then after a while it will grow the husk on the top, the shibolas. But before that, it will just grow like straw, right? Before it forms that on the top. So Kaitzer L'Shachas, you can cut it down to be fodder for the animals and feed it to the animals even before the Eimer. The Eimer, you weren't supposed to harvest before the Eimer. But this is not considered a harvest. This is just for fodder. And there were other examples when this was acceptable. So,
Father, like the father?
No, not like the father and the mother. The father is in animal food. Tanan Hassam, we learned in a Mishnah over there, this is probably in Peah. The Mishnah is talking about that you have to give a corner of the field to the poor. Now it says what's considered a field. So, because you have to give it twice if there's a division between the field, or is it just once?
Is it just one corner or all 4?
No, one corner. It says, Ve'elu mafsikin lepeya. The following will divide a field in half, and you'll have to give two separate payas for each one. So one it says is hanachal. Let's say there's a stream that goes straight through the field. So this would be if there's an area. It doesn't have to be actually a stream. It could be an area of like hard rock that straight through the field where nothing can grow over there. But shalulas is a stream of rainwater that's rushing through the it melts on the mountains and then it comes flowing through. So this would be a derech harayachid, derech harabim. Derech harayachid is a path of 4 amos. Derech harabim is a path of 16 amos. That would be obvious if 4 amos is shvil harabim. And even if there's a path of not even a road, but just a path that the people walk by foot, u'shvil hayachid, or a path of an individual, but that has to be hakavua bein b'meisacham and bein b'meisachasham. That has to be there the entire year. You see, the other things were that maybe the rain was there only in the winter or in the spring. If it's this thin path, it has to be kavua. It has to be that they use it the whole year, whether it's the summer, whether it's the winter. And then it would be a division in the field. Habur, not habar, but habur. The bor is a field that wasn't plowed, fallow, right? The field that's just left empty, or vanir, or it was plowed, but it wasn't sowed, right? They didn't put seed in it. Bezera acher, or there was another grain that was planted in this field that would divide the field in half. What would they plant on the other side? They would plant the legumes. They would plant the beans. They already knew. George Washington Carver, remember that? He taught them to plant beans in between every other thing, but the Mishnah knew it already before. So, right? That was in school. They told you about that. Yeah.
No, he probably learned.
I don't know. They learned it from okay. Kaitzer L'Shachas, and listen to this. Kaitzer L'Shachas. If someone harvests the field for shachas, means for fodder, that's also mafsik. That also divides the field. Now, this is Divrei Rameir. This is what Rameir says. In order to understand this, you have to accept the fact that if it's a regular harvest, Then what do you mean you divided the field in half? You started to harvest and you didn't finish. That's not a division of a field. You start harvesting a field, it doesn't divide it into two. It's a regular harvest. But if it's not a harvest, if it's like a field that you left fallow, if it's not considered katsira, so then that could be, you have three fields here. You have the field on the right, you have the field on the left. In the middle, you have shachas, which is a different field, like a zera acher, it's something else. But that's only if you don't consider it a harvest. Kaitz l'shachas is not considered a chilek of the harvest. So that's what Rameir holds. And so if Rameir holds this, then that would be an explanation for why in the Mishnah you're allowed to harvest shachas because it's not considered a harvest.
If someone has a piece of land and you have like 4 different things, you would have to pay from each of 4. Like based on
If he's growing 4 different things,
I don't know, but if it's divided by any of
you have to learn the Mishnayos and Peah. There's a lot of details to this. This is just saying if you have a field that's growing one thing, but it's divided in half, you have to leave two corners. Chachamim say ein mafsek elam kein charash. Says no, it's not enough kaitz l'shachas. That doesn't mean it divides the field. And we'll see that the chachamim are going to hold that the kaitz l'shachas is just a regular harvest. If you start to cut, it doesn't mean that you have two fields. Only if you leave it fallow. You didn't plow it at all. Amar Rabba Bar Bechana Rabbi Yechanan. Rabba Bar Bechana says the name of Rabbi Yechanan. These are Amiraim in Eretz Yisrael. They say that Rabbi Meir, that just told us that Kaitzel Shachas will divide a field. He says B'shitas Reb Shimon Amra. He says he's following the opinion of Reb Shimon. Now Reb Shimon is his friend, right? The Amar Reb Shimon says in our Mishnah. If you go back to our Mishnah, we learned in our Mishnah. We had. First, it says that kaitzel l'shachas is not a problem. Then we had Rabbi Yehuda. That's only if you were kaitzel l'shachas before it grew a third, but after a third would be different. And then we had the opinion of Rabbi Shimon that says no, even after a third, it's not a problem. So what we're saying over here is that Rabbi Meir is following the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Anything that's not fully grown grain is not considered a harvest, so it's considered a different type of field. Therefore, Reb Meir would follow this. Basically, what we just said is that Reb Meir that says kaitz l'shachas divides a field is because any sort of harvest any sort of premature harvest is not considered a harvest. Yosef Rabba b'kamal Shmaita. Rabba in Bavel is saying over the statement from Rabbi Bar Bechana Rabbi Yechanan, which was said in Eretz Yisrael. He's saying it over in Bavel that Reb Meir follows the opinion of Reb Shimon. Isvi Rabacha Bar Huna l'Rava. Now it's funny because it's just switched from Rabba to Rava. Maybe because they were students. Rabacha Bar Huna says to Rava. Anyway, he says like this: Achla Chagav Kirsamua Nemalim. Shibartu Aruach Hakal Maidim Charash Mafsik Loi Charash Einem Mafsik. Let's say it wasn't a human intervention. There was no human activity here. Let's say it was grasshoppers. They ate from the top. They ate off all the grain from the top. Or a worm came from the bottom and ate the worms from the bottom and kills from the bottom. He says over there, everyone's going to agree that it's not considered a separate field unless you then went ahead afterwards and you plowed it. In other words, let's say they just, for some reason, just ate a strip of the field, the grasshoppers and the worms, a strip of the field straight through the center of the field. Now you have 2 fields on both sides. So do you say, okay, well, it's all one field, but the grasshoppers ate? Or do you say that, no, I have 2 fields here, one on the right and one on the left? So he quotes this statement that only if you plowed through the field, in other words, you took away all of the stalks and everything, then it's going to be considered a separate field. Gemara says, Hakal Maidim Man. When you said Hakal Maidim, everyone would agree that you needed to plow it. Who are you referring to when you say everyone? Must be Reb Meir, because Reb Meir would hold that when you harvest for shachas, when you harvest it early, premature harvest, is considered a separation in the field, right? Reb Meir holds this premature, not the chachamim, but a premature harvest. But nevertheless, even though this is a premature harvest, but he admits that this is not a human premature harvest, and therefore you need to actually do something to show that it's a separate field. So who is the one that's admitting here that it needs to be plowed in order to divide the field? It must be Reb Meir. Now, the problem is, according to Rabbi Bar Bachana, in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, he says that Reb Meir is really following Reb Shimon, that says it doesn't matter if it's before a third or after a third. Gemara is going to challenge that. It says if you say that when the Mishnah says that Reb Meir says that if you're allowed to harvest it early, that's because it hasn't grown 1/3 yet, right? 1/3 of the potential growth. So then, what we would do is like this: Brisa, the charashin shlei charashlei, b'shehei bishlish. Why does Reb Meir over there require that you plow it in the Brisa when it says the worms came, and only if you plowed it would it make a difference? That's because over there it already grew 1/3. That's because it already grew 1/3. Very nice. Very nice. I can't concentrate. I see all the good stuff. So that's only if it already grew 1/3. So then you need to do an action to actually make a difference here. However, so in other words, like this, the Mishnah says, in the Mishnah, we had the opinion of Reb Meir, who's the Tanakama, that says Kaitzel l'shachas, and feed to an animal. Reb Yehuda says that's only if it didn't grow 1/3. Reb Shimon says even if it did grow 1/3. We're saying that Reb Meir is following Reb Shimon that says even if it grow 1/3. So 1 second. If we would say that Reb Meir holds that before it grew 1/3, that's going to be a difference, right? We're talking about only before it grew 1/3, that's going to be a difference. That's what's it's permissible to plow before the Aimer. It's permissible to harvest before the Aimer. And then also that would be the case where if the worms came or the grasshoppers came, you would need to plow it, then fine. However, the Brisa would be, if it grew 1/3. But if you say that our Mishnah is talking about also the opinion of Reb Shimon, that holds even if it grew 1/3, it's still permissible to plow before the Aimer. When it came to the Mishnah, the Ktsira, the Adam, a person plowed it. A person didn't plow. A person harvested. And Amar Reb Meir, Leishmei Ktsira, and Reb Meir says, you see, if the Mishnah is talking about, if the first opinion of the Mishnah, Reb Meir, says that you're allowed to harvest before the Aimer, is talking about when it grew 1/3, which is the opinion of Reb Shimon, so then Reb Meir would say that if it grew 1/3, you can harvest, which means that it's not considered a harvest. When he says you're allowed to harvest before the Aimer, it means it's not considered a harvest, which means that would divide a field. Because if it's considered a harvest, it won't divide the field. You know, it's like it flips on you over here. Not being a harvest means that it's permissible before the Aimer, and it also means that it can divide the field. However, Hacha over here, when we talk about the grasshoppers, Hacha by the grasshoppers, like Kolshkin, for sure, Reb Meir should hold that it should divide the field, even if you didn't plow it, because it's not for sure. It's not considered a harvest. What do we need to divide a field? If it's considered a harvest, then it doesn't divide the field in half. So when it was 1/3 and you harvested it, we say that's not considered a harvest. So for sure, if you didn't harvest, the grasshoppers came. For sure, it's not a harvest. So why do you have to plow it? For sure, it should be a divided field. However, but if I say the other way, let's go the other way. If I say that when do we consider it permissible? That's only when is it not considered harvest? That's only if it's before 1/3, before it grew 1/3. But after it grew 1/3, then it would be considered a harvest. And then the grasshoppers come after 1/3. Then we tell you that you have to do a plowing to make it considered separate, to divide the field. But if it's both of those cases are after 1/3, then if you harvest it, it's not considered a harvest. For sure, when the grasshoppers come, it's not considered a harvest. We're asking a kasha on Rabbi Bar Bachana that says that Reb Meir and Reb Shimon are saying the same thing. The same thing means that it's permissible even after it grew 1/3 to harvest before the Omer.
What happens with after the first harvest? They burn that.
Whatever the case is, it divides the field. Right? Ella, rather, we have to explain the opinion of Reb Meir a little different. And it goes like this. Ella Reb Meir, Beshitas Reb Yehuda Amar. Reb Meir is actually following Reb Yehuda. Now, this actually makes sense because I think we have a rule where it says, anywhere where Reb Yehuda says in the Mishnah, Bamer Devarim Amurim or Emasai, then he's not arguing on the previous opinion, he's just explaining the previous opinion. So here we have in the Mishnah, it says, Emasai, I don't know why the commentators here don't say that, but that's what I'm assuming. Emasai, when do we say that harvesting before the Omer is permissible, when it's for Shachas, when it's for fodder? That's Bisman Sheis Chalad Shlevish. That's only if you started before it grew a third. Then it's going to be usher. So now it fits. Reb Meir says that it's permissible to harvest before the Omer because it was less than a third. But if the grasshoppers came and ate it, so then it's not going to be considered a separation in the field until you plow it, because it was more than a third. Otherwise, if it was more than a third, it would be a regular harvest. If you would do the harvest, it would be a regular harvest. More than a third, you have to do an action. Okay, now the Gemara says, "Ema de shamat le Rabbi Yehuda lebehema, but l'adam yishamat le." Now we have a problem. What we're doing is we're going back to the Mishnah and we're reading the Mishnah straight through. You're allowed to harvest for an animal before the Omer, for fodder, the shachas. Rabbi Yehuda says only if it's less than a third. Reb Shimon says even if it's more than a third. So when we read Reb Meir to Rabbi Yehuda, it says, when are you allowed to harvest? Reb Meir says for an animal. What does Rabbi Yehuda say? Rabbi Yehuda says even for a person. Right? If you look at the Mishnah, it says, I'm Rabbi Emasai. Oh, he doesn't say for a person. Emasai, Bisman Shemaschad Shlevi Yeshlish. Okay, now. I only know that Rabbi Yehuda says that it's only before the third. That's for an animal. But L'adam Mishametle, would he hold that the same thing would apply to if it's more than a third? Okay, now, but it would apply also to harvesting for a person. Now Reb Meir clearly said for an animal. And Reb Meir is following Rabbi Yehuda. Yeah, Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda are students of Rabbi Akiva and Reb Shimon. Now, in our Mishnah regarding the separation of the field, not in our Mishnah, in the Mishnah that we quoted from Peah regarding the separating the fields for Peah, over there it didn't seem that it had to be specifically for an animal. It says Keitzel l'shachas. It doesn't say for an animal. So if Reb Meir is following Rabbi Yehuda, that means Rabbi Yehuda would hold that it would be also for a if this opinion would be Rabbi Yehuda, then this would mean that it would be the also even harvesting for a human would also be considered not a harvest. It says Dimkein Avad Plus Tanai. It turns out that our Mishnah is going to have three different opinions. First opinion is Reb Meir that says specifically for an animal. Rabbi Yehuda would say that it's even for a person. Reb Shimon would hold that even if it's more than a third. Problem is that you're telling me before that Rabbi Yehuda was not arguing on Reb Meir. Gemara says, Al Kiyasar Rav Dimi Amar, when Rav Dimi came, he said, Reb Meir B'shitas Rabbi Kiva Rabbi Amar. That Reb Meir is following, not Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, he's following a different opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who's his teacher. Let me just take a look at your commentary here. What's the issue of having three opinions in the Mishnah? Gemara seems to have a problem. Oh, you're going to have three opinions in the Mishnah. Because if it were so that Rabbi Yehuda states his ruling, even when the grain is harvested for people, there would be three conflicting Tanaic views in our Mishnah. And this cannot be. What's the problem? If Rabbi Yehuda's ruling would apply where the grain is intended for human consumption, okay. Rabbi Yehuda is disputing the Tanna Kama. This, however, is impossible. The Gemara in Sanhedrin states, they're quoting it here. The Gemara in Sanhedrin states that whenever Rabbi Yehuda prefaces his comments with the word Emasai, it means he's not disputing.
Before they had that, Rav Meir was explaining Rabbi Yehuda's opinion.
No, Rabbi Yehuda is explaining Rabbi Meir's opinion.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe. So the Gemara now says that therefore Rabbi Meir has to go like Rabbi Akiva. Different opinion. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir would be holding the same opinion. He's following in accordance, not explaining. In accordance. Right? He's following that opinion. Explaining is different. Rabbi Yehuda is explaining Rabbi Meir. He says, Amasai, when does Rabbi Meir say this? That's different than saying in accordance. So Rabbi Dimi says that Rabbi Meir is following Rabbi Akiva. It says, even if you're harvesting for a person, it's not considered a harvest, and therefore that would divide the field. Again, if it's considered a harvest, then you're not dividing the field because it's not a division in the field. You just harvest. You started to harvest. Big deal. It's not. You don't have two fields there. What did he say? What did Rabbi Akiva say? It says, D'Tanan, we have a Mishnah that says like this, Haminamer, if someone makes his field like a leopard, which means it's blotches. He harvest and then he leaves it, and he harvests and he leaves it. And he left stalks that are still that didn't finish growing. They're still moist. It means that they're still growing. Rabbi Kiva says that you have to make separate payas for each one because you left these areas. Okay, that means that even harvest for a human being divides the field. The no, it's just one field. Rabbi Kiva says that's only, or Shmuel, this is Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, says, when did Rabbi Kiva say this? That's only because you were doing a very interesting type of harvest. You were harvesting when it didn't grow a third, and you weren't going to really use the grain. You were just going to toast it to be able to eat it as toasted kernels, like popcorn. But if it was fully grown and you wanted to take that grain, then no, the Rebbe Meir wouldn't say. The Rebbe Meir would say that it's all one. Rabbi Kiva wouldn't say that it would all be one field. Basically, what we just got from this is that if you're harvesting early, if it's under 1/3, right, it didn't grow a third yet, then that would divide a field, even if it's for a human. Okay, and that's the explanation of the Mishnah in Peah, that harvesting early divides the field because he follows Rabbi Akiva. Where says, Eini, is it really so? Rabbi Yochanan says that Rabbi Akiva would divide the field even if it wasn't harvesting early, even if the grain was fully grown. And if it's more than a third, which we didn't want to say that before, we wanted to say that Rabbi Meir holds when it's less than a third. Anyway, the Gemara answers that's not a problem because we said that Rabbi Meir is following Rabbi Akiva, his teacher. Don't worry about that. He's following Rabbi Akiva, his teacher, that says that even if it's for human consumption, it will still divide a field, but not in the size of the grain. Rabbi Akiva would actually say even if it's grown more, and he just holds that when it hasn't grown a third, that it's going to be dividing a field if it's harvested for an animal. Or for clayus, for a toasted grain.
If harvesting for water divides a field, like a couple.
No, the opposite. If you're harvesting, as you're harvesting the field, you don't say, okay, I have two fields here. If it's considered a harvest, then you just started harvesting. It's all one field, and you started harvesting. You don't harvest the whole field like that. You harvest part of it. So maybe you harvest it down the middle. Doesn't mean you have two fields. If it's not considered a harvest, then that's when you have the two fields. That's why there's two things over here are like counter. They go the opposite. It's not considered a harvest. That meant you're allowed to harvest before the Aimer, and it also would divide the field. If it is considered a harvest, you're not allowed to do it before the Aimer, and then it won't divide the field. Okay. The next piece of the Mishnah said, there are certain times that we're allowed to harvest before the Aimer. We have three examples here. One of them is if it was going to become kalayim because something else was growing here. Another thing is if you needed it for a beis ha'avel. Another thing is if you needed it for a beis medrash. In other words, the students needed to sit or the guests needed to sit. My time, what's the reason that you're allowed to harvest for beis ha'avel or beis medrash? The Gemara says, mitzvah. It says your harvest. And when it's not your harvest, it's the harvest of a mitzvah. We weren't discussing that. It says that when you do a harvest like this, you don't bundle it up. You just leave them as individual pieces of grain. My timer. What's the reason? The kama de efshel leitachinan. You try to be memayet in malacha. It's interesting that it looks like there's a concept over here of not to do the harvesting. Part of the harvesting would be bundle it. So we try, even though you are allowed to harvest, but you try not to do any other activities that are involved, just as little as possible. It says that you're allowed to clear out. This is different because that was just the Rabbanan, clearing out an Eitzer, a storage room. This is that was for Achnas Sarchim. This is harvesting a grain, and we need to talk about Shabbos. Shabbos is going to come up. Here we're just talking about doing a harvest before the Eimer, which you weren't supposed to do. Now we say mitzvah Eimer lahavim menakama. The mitzvah is to bring it from standing grain. Taner Rabbanan. Standing grain means a grain that hasn't been cut yet, cut down. You have to go and cut it lishma. Taner Rabbanan takriv minchas bikurim. This pasuk it starts off with the im takriv. If you'll bring the minchas bikurim, which means the Eimer, it finishes off takriv es minchas bikurech. It says takriv again. Our Gemara is going to tell us that it says takriv twice. We're going to learn so many things from this. It's okay. I have the pasuk. Don't worry. It says takriv minchas bikurim matam aleimar. Why does it have to say it? It already says it. It says it at the end. Takriv es minchas bikurech. Lefish mitzvah menakama. It's coming to tell me that really the mitzvah is to bring it from the standing grain. How do you know if you don't find any standing grain because it was already harvested? You're allowed to bring from the bundles. You're allowed to be the Eved. You can use bundles of grain already. Even if it wasn't cut l'shma. It says you should bring, which comes to teach me that you can bring from other grain as well. Dabar acher, another pshat in the double expression of takriv. Takriv fish mitzvah lahavim and alach. You should bring it from the carmel, which means the soft, full grains. How do you know that if it wasn't lach, if it wasn't fresh, it was already dry, that's still acceptable? The second expression of you should bring comes to include that as well. Dover acher, another pshat. It says in double expression, you're supposed to harvest by night. How do you know that if you harvest by day, it's still kosher? And another point is v'deichas Shabbos, that you're allowed to harvest it on Shabbos if the second day of Pesach is Shabbos. I don't even know you're allowed to harvest it. Talmud Laimar takriv kol shehu, even if it's from the standing grain, and takriv mikol makom, you can bring it even if it's not close to Yerushalayim. Takriv afilu b'Shabbos, you can bring it even if it's Shabbos, and it's we're going to see if that means harvesting or if that means or just offering the Eimer. And takriv afilu b'tumah, you bring it because the community offering is brought even if the people that are bringing it are tamei, or if they don't have anyone that's tahar, you can bring it even b'tumah, like any set time offering where the kainim are tamei. Okay, we've said over here that im niktzar b'yom kosher. We learned in the Mishnah that if it's harvested by day, it's kosher. The Eved. Problem is, Vatanan, the Mishnah says, another Mishnah says, it says the entire night you're allowed to harvest the grain and to offer the fats on the altar of the korbanos that were offered during the day, that the fats weren't burnt. You can put it in at night. So that night you have two things going on. You have the fats and you also have the harvesting of the grain to some field close to Yerushalayim. Zeklal. The rule is, anything that the mitzvah is to do it by day, kosher kol hayom, and you can do it by day. Kol davar shemitzvah b'layla, anything that the mitzvah is to do it by night, kosher kol halayla, you could do it all night. Now, which means not by day. Ktani layla tamid hayom. Now we can learn like this. It says that mitzvah is to do it by day, you can do it only by day. The mitzvah is to do it by night, you can do it only by night. So let's do a comparison. Ma diyayim b'layla loy, just like things that you're supposed to do by day, you're not allowed to do them at night. After layla b'yayim namilay. Also, the things that by night, you can't do them by day. Why do you tell me that you can harvest the grain by day? B'di'evet. You can't bring karbanos by night. You're supposed to do them by day. So things that you're supposed to do by night, you shouldn't be able to do. You should not be allowed to do by day. Amar Rabba Lekasha. Rabba says, I have a way of answering this. Harebi, Ha Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon. This is Rebbe, and this is his chavrusa, Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon. This machlekes, if it could be harvested by day, b'diavad. The Tanya started in a brisa. If a person, the kohen that's doing the aimer becomes tamei, if you have other grain that's growing in the fields, they tell him, go quickly. This grain became tamei. Go quickly, harvest more grain and bring it. Now, when are we doing this? It's middle of the 16th of Nisan by day. You're harvesting by day. But if there's no other grain, we say to him, be smart and be silent. In general, that's a smart thing, be silent. So, Divri Rebbe, that's what Rebbe says. In other words, we have a concern that people may think that menachos are allowed to be brought betuma. We don't want people to think that. So we just say, don't tell anyone that it's tummy, and you don't have any options, so just bring it. And hopefully no one will learn from that you can bring mistakenly learn from that. You can bring betuma. Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon Aimer benkach ubenkach. Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon says even if there is other grain growing, so Aimer la you say to him be smart and just be quiet. Because he can't harvest it by day anyway, even if there is grain. Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon holds that even b'diavad it's possible if you harvest it by day. Rabbi holds that b'diavad it would have been kosher, and we were going to go look for it. You didn't find it, so then you do it b'tumah. Follow? So we had a question before. Were you allowed to do it by day? That would be the opinion of Rabbi b'diavad. You're allowed to do it by day. You can, if it's done by day, it's kosher. Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon says that you can't do it by day. Amar Rabbi bar Chanan Rabbi Yechanan. The second Rabbi bar Chanan Rabbi Yechanan doing the same sort of thing. No, it's the day after Yom Tov. The first day of Pesach is the day after the first day of Pesach. It's the 16th of Nisan.
And when is the Yom Kippur?
16th of Nisan.
But I thought you were saying the harvesting it before.
They're harvesting it the night before. They would go out at night.
Oh, that
Yeah,
night.
flashlights on their yarmulkes, going out, looking at the grain.
So they weren't redeeming a Seder?
No, you're thinking about in Chutz La'aretz, we have two Sedarim. They only had one Seder the first night. Pesach. This is the second night. While we're doing our second Seder after Chatzos, they're busy harvesting. Anyway, so Rabbi bar Chanan says, name Rabbi Yechon, Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon, Beshitas Rabbi Kiva Rabbi Shalaviv Amra. Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon is following his father's teacher, Rabbi Akiva. Who's his father? Shimon bar Yochai. Who's his father's teacher? Rabbi Akiva. The Tanan was taught in the Mishnah. Klalam Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva gave a rule. Kol malach Hashem shalalasei smerev Shabbos in the Dechas. That's the Shabbos. Excuse me. Rabbi Akiva was talking about bris milah. And over there's a whole machlekes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. If you're allowed to do things on Shabbos that could have been done before Shabbos, Rabbi Akiva says absolutely not, and Rabbi Eliezer says that it's permissible. Machshirei mitzvah, Rabbi Eliezer said were permissible. Now, Savar law, Rabbi Shmuel. Now, there's one other detail here. So, why does Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon hold that you're not allowed to do this on during the day? You're not allowed to do it during the day. First of all, because he holds that anything that can be done, he holds that things that could be done on Shabbos. We have to get two opinions here. Things that could be done on Shabbos have to be done. That could be done before Shabbos have to be done before Shabbos. And also holds like Rabbi Shmuel, Damar K'tzir Seimer mitzvah. He holds that the harvesting of the Eimer is a mitzvah. The Tanan Rabbi Shmuel Eimer Macharish Rishus. It says on the Shemitah that you're not allowed to harvest. What type of harvesting you're not allowed? Well, you're not allowed to plow. What type of plowing are you not allowed to do? Only plowing that's voluntary, things that's for private purposes. Afkatzir, also the harvesting is rishus. That's when it says that you're not allowed to harvest. That would only be for private purposes. But the harvesting of the grain for the aimer, which is a mitzvah, that's permissible. Okay, so now when you combine those two opinions together, it goes like this: if you're going to say the nixar shleik mitzvah kosher, if we would accept the opinion that if you harvest it improperly, which means you harvest it by day, in the morning, it would be kosher. My dachi Shabbos, and why should we say that it's dachi Shabbos? We said that you're allowed to harvest it on Shabbos. That's one of the things that we said. You're allowed to harvest it on Shabbos. But if harvesting not on the correct time is considered still kosher, so Nixrei Me'erev Shabbos, why don't you just harvest it the day before, 2 days before? Elamida Dachi Shabbos, the fact that it does push off Shabbos, Shema Mina, Niktar like mitzvah is possible. So we're putting together these two statements that you can harvest it on Shabbos, together with harvesting it by day is possible. Why is harvesting it by day possible? Because it has to be harvested in its proper time. Why are you allowed to harvest it on Shabbos? Because it has to be harvested in its proper time. So Rabbi Akiva that says that you're allowed to, that anything that could be done at another time doesn't push off Shabbos. And Rabbi Shmuel that says that harvesting is a mitzvah. So only you can only do the mitzvah of the properly on Shabbos, but if it's and you can't do it any other time, and that would explain why Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon says that by doing it by day would be possible. Okay, the Gemara says for Rabbi Lav Talmid to Rabbi Shimon. 1 second, Rabbi Eliezer Bar Shimon is a student of his father Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is a student of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says that if you can do it by day, then it doesn't push off Shabbos. Obviously, you can't do it by day. You can't do it at any time. The Gemara says, and Rabbi argues on that. It says, 1 second, but Rabbi also is a student of Rabbi Shimon, right? It says V'atanya, but we have a brayso that says Amar Rabbi, Kishayina l'meidim Torah eitzel Rabbi Shimon b'tkaya hiyamal l'Shemin v'alentus mechatza legag lekarfus mekarfus v'achet. Rabbi Shimon held that all of these areas were considered one rishus. The storage area to the roof, and the roof to the storage area. He says that we were learning with Rabbi Shimon, we would carry oil we would go from one area to another area to another area, and it was all considered one domain. It wasn't on the floor, it wasn't on the ground. It was going from roof to roof. It was all acceptable. Until we would reach the spring, which we would wash ourselves in, and then we would have oils.
What's
So
called the rooftops in Brazil? That area where you can go to poor areas.
Bronx?
You know what I'm talking about?
I don't know. I've never been there. Daniel's not on. Okay. So the Gemara says, if Rebbe is a student of Reb Shimon, so why doesn't he agree with Rebbe Akiva? It says Savalaki idach to Reb Shimon. Actually, Rebbe holds like a different Reb Shimon, a different opinion of Reb Shimon. The Tani was taught, I'm Reb Shimon. Shimon says, because Rebbe says that if it's harvested by day, it's going to be kosher.
Favelas.
Barbelas?
Favelas, that's the group of houses that each rooftop. I mean, it's famous.
Okay.
Gemara.
Amar Reb Shimon, come and see how special the Chaviv mitzvah b'shaita, how special is the mitzvah in its time. Because you're allowed to offer the fats in the inner organs the entire night, but they wouldn't wait. They would do it by day because that's the proper time. So what comes out from this is that even though the mitzvah is harvest by night, that's the best mitzvah, nevertheless, you can still do it by day, and nevertheless, it still pushes off Shabbos. B'diavad. In other words, what we're learning over here is you could have done it by Erev Shabbos, but because in its time it's better, so then we do it even on Shabbos. Now, would Rabbi Akiva agree to this? It explains like this. You see, what's happening is that the fats in the limbs, if an animal was brought on Shabbos, they could actually burn that fat by night, after Shabbos. They don't have to burn it on Shabbos. But they wouldn't do that. They would actually burn it on Shabbos. But Rabbi Akiva holds that anything that could be done at another time, you're not supposed to push off Shabbos. You're not supposed to do it, right? He says, no, because since the mitzvah is, the Iker mitzvah is to do it then, so then that's when they would do it. So therefore, by the Omer as well, since the Iker mitzvah is to do the Omer by night, they would do it by night. They wouldn't do it any other time. Now the Gemara says, for 1 second, according to this, then Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon leishmialei. Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon never heard this. That maybe according to Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon also you should be allowed to harvest it on Shabbos, and also you should be able to harvest it by day. Ella Shani Hassam, Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon would hold that you can't compare the two. Burning the fats on Shabbos, even though you could wait till at night, is different than harvesting the Aimer on earlier by day. Right? It says like this. What happened is Sharidachsa Shchita as a Shabbos. This carbon that you're bringing now on Shabbos, you already violated Shabbos, or not violated, but you pushed off Shabbos because not postponed. You like broke the Shabbos because you had to do a shechita. And once you did that, it's already in, and you already burn the fats. You continue to burn the fats. However, but by the Omer, you didn't do anything yet. All you're doing is you're bringing it earlier in the wrong time. Actually, no. By the Omer, the original machlekes by the Omer was when he became tamei, and now we wanted to bring in more grain by day. No. At the time of if you would harvest early, that's what we're talking about. At the time of harvesting, Shabbos was never pushed off. Tomorrow when you're going to bring the carbon, it's going to push off Shabbos. However, it didn't happen yet. And if it would have been possible to do it from Erev Shabbos, then we would have said to do it from Erev Shabbos. Yeah. That's why he holds that it can't be done any other time. Okay. Well, Rebbe, and according to Rebbe, that says that he learns that the Omer could be brought on Shabbos from the fact that you can burn the fats on Shabbos. We also have but how can you compare the two? Over there you already pushed off Shabbos. Over here you didn't push off Shabbos. Rebbe holds in general that Ktsir Saimer doesn't push off Shabbos. It contradicts what we said. Gemara says V'loi. But we said V'atanan Chachamim Maimrem Echad b'Shabbos Echad b'Chol Echad Chol Mishalosh Hayabah. We said that whether it's Shabbos or whether it's the weekday, we had a machlekes between Reb Shimon and the Chachamim. How many saw you brought in order to get the grain? We said that according to the Chachamim, whether it was Shabbos or whether it was always three. You always brought three. It says, oh, that's the like Rebbe. That doesn't fit with Rebbe because according to Rebbe, you would have harvested the grain earlier anyway. We have another question. Echad Shabbos, Echad Chol, Shleisha, B'Shalish Kubus, Shalish Magalis. It says you would use 3 people, 3 baskets, and this is on Shabbos. It says the like Rebbe. That doesn't fit with Rebbe. According to Rebbe, you would have done it at another time. Then the Gemara says, "B'Shabbos Yom Lam Shabbosu." It's on Shabbos. We make announcements. We say this Shabbos. So that's also the like Rebbe. Gemara says, "V'nichse b'yem kosher v'deichas Shabbos." But the Mishnah says it pushes off Shabbos. It says, "Man shamat leida v'nichse b'yem kosher." Who holds that you're allowed to cut it by day? That's Rebbe. Uktani deichas Shabbos. And it also says that it pushes off Shabbos. So obviously, Rebbe holds that you're allowed to do the harvesting of the grain on Shabbos. My love, Ktsira must be talking about that the harvesting you do on Shabbos. Where it says, "Loi," that's not what it meant for Deichas Shabbos. Deichas Shabbos didn't mean the harvesting; it meant you're allowed to offer it on Shabbos. That's when we learned it in the Mishnah. I said we're going to have 2 pshatim for Deichas Shabbos if it's referring to the harvesting or to the offering. Okay. But Rebbe holds that you're not allowed to harvest the Omer on Shabbos. V'atanya Rebbe Omer b'yadaber Moshe Mayadei Hashem. Rebbe said that Moshe spoke these holidays of Hashem Talmud Leimar. What was he saying when it says these holidays? I would only think that the carbon Tamid and the carbon Pesach, where it says b'mayadai, then that would teach me b'mayadai afila b'Shabbos, mayadai afila b'Tumah. I would know that in its time would be Shabbos, and in its time would mean even if it's Tamei, that would be that you would be allowed to offer it. However, Shar Kabbanas Tzibur minayin. How do you know that other sacrifices could also be brought on Shabbos, or if they're tamei, if they're community sacrifices? Talmud Laimar elu tasal Hashem b'mayadechem. Does these you offer to Hashem in its time? Offer it to Hashem in its time would mean that you're allowed to even do the harvesting. Minayin l'rabbis oimer ba'karivima shtei alechem ba'karivima. How do you know that also the oimer and what's brought with it and the shtei alechem that's brought with it that wasn't written clearly over there? It says Talmud Laimar v'yidaber Moshes mayadei Hashem akasav kavah mayad lekulam. The pasuk considers all of them in its time, which would mean that the oimer could be brought on Shabbos. Which means obviously Rebbe holds that the Omer is Deichel Shabbos. It says Lamai. What did you mean that it's Deichel Shabbos? If you're talking about offering it, when it comes to the 2 loaves of bread on Shavuos, do you offer that? There's no offering. That's the Kayanim eat it. Elapshita means Tchina Varkada, must be talking about the preparation of it, which means the sifting of the flour, the grinding and the sifting. The Kava say Gabi Yomer. And now we have to compare that back to the Omer. What's the preparation of the Omer? Ktsira. It would mean the harvesting of the grain. The Kadach Yeser Shabbos, and it pushes off Shabbos. So we see that Rebbe holds that the harvesting of the grain pushes off Shabbos. Omer says, Ella Omer la Krava Shtei Alechem Lafia. No. We weren't talking about the harvesting of the grain. When we said it pushes off Shabbos, talking about the Omer meant that the offering of the grain pushes off Shabbos. And the Shtei Alechem was talking about the baking of it pushes off Shabbos. The Omer had a kaimetz, right? Well, the offering of the fats, we said, because it was already pushed off beforehand, because you'd already did the shechita on the carbon, right? This, they would have to, according to Rebbe, you would have to harvest the grain of the Omer before Shabbos. The Savar Rebbe, that Taner Mekadesh, that the Rebbe would hold that the oven that bakes the Shtei Alechem consecrates the Shtei Alechem. He afila me'esmal, and therefore you couldn't bake it Erev Shabbos. You had to bake it on Shabbos, because if you would bake it yesterday, then the oven would already consecrate it. What happens to a carbon that's left overnight? If Salah Belina, it becomes puzzled by being left overnight. So that's what Rebbe's explanation, that it was done on Shabbos. Savar Rebbe Taner Mekadesh, and Rebbe holds, in order to explain this, that the Shtei Alechem is brought on Shabbos, you have to bake it on Shabbos. Rebbe holds that the Tanner consecrates it, but for Tanya, we have a brayso kivsi atzeres yemekachem alechem ala b'shchita. Says that what consecrates the Shtei Alechem, the animal that was brought with it, the shchita of that animal, not the oven. Ketzad. Let's we have a whole bunch of halachas that are associated with this. Shachtan l'shman v'zarktam l'shman kadosh alechem. If the shechita was done properly and the sprinkling was properly, the bread is consecrated. If the shechita was not properly, the thoughts were not properly, the sprinkling was like kaddish. Let's say it was half and half. It's holy, but it's not holy. We had a machlekes what that meant. Divrei Rebbe, that's a Rebbe's opinion. Now, apparently, it's not the oven that's consecrating it; it's the shechita of the animal. There was two lambs that came with it. You need both of them to be kaddish. Okay, whatever the case is, it's not the oven. We have a whole bunch of they have a whole bunch of things. We're saying that Rebbe holds that the oven consecrates, but that doesn't mean that this is not mater, right? Because it's consecrated, you still need a mater. So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman Yitzchak says that when it says that it's holy, it's not holy. In the opinion of Rebbe, that meant hukvu v'lei hikvu ka'amar, talking about associating the breads with these lambs. Are the breads now attached to these lambs that I can't now bring other lambs as well? So the shechita is the one that does that. If the shechita is done properly, then they become associated with these lambs.
Excuse me, he said shechita's matter. I thought the zrika was.
Yeah, the zrika. It's the zrika.
Yeah, the shechita here is only. It's like we said, similar to the other wives, whatever they were called.
The zika.
The zika with the lesson.
Right. So in other words, we're not saying the Tanner is Makadashit, but what combines the two, that these breads go with these lambs, that's the shechita and the zrika. Rabbi Yishmael. Okay, Yeshikayach, everyone.
Great job, everybody.
Okay. We're holding on Ayin base, Amid base by the new parak.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Yeah.
Atzlach.
Good one.